It was the loudest metallic crash I'd ever heard in my life, followed by a cloud of dust so thick it set off my motion light. I opened the door in my tie and briefcase, coffee still in hand, thinking a truck had plowed through my garage. But no. It was worse. Much worse. Sitting dead center in my driveway like an industrial tumor was a massive rusted dumpster, teetering like it had been dropped from orbit. And partially shoved inside it, with the back bumper still hanging out, was Karen's white Mercedes SUV. Her vanity plate literally said HRH Karen. I blinked. I turned around thinking maybe I was hallucinating from the early morning fog. But no, it was real. The whole neighborhood could hear her heels clacking up the sidewalk a second later. She stopped at the edge of my lawn like she was about to unveil the Mona Lisa. I asked what the hell this was. She smiled and said 5 words I'll never forget. Welcome to Community Cleanup Week. At first, I thought it was a joke, like some bad HOA prank that would end with a laugh and someone pulling the dumpster away with a big ribbon on top. But no one was laughing. Especially not me. I was already 15 minutes late to a meeting that could secure my small engineering firm a government contract worth over $500,000. I couldn't get my car out. It was literally blocked in by a 4-ton trash container filled with broken furniture, old ceiling tiles, and what looked suspiciously like an entire moldy couch. I asked her again, whose idea was this? She tapped her clipboard and said it was part of her new beautification initiative, approved by the HOA president. I pointed out that we didn't currently have a president. She said, and I quote, that she had temporarily assumed the position until further notice. And then she had the audacity to sip her oversized iced coffee like she hadn't just committed driveway terrorism. I pulled out my phone and called the city immediately. I was redirected through 4 departments before finally reaching someone in sanitation who looked up the address. He told me there was no legal permit for the dumpster. Then he added something that made my blood run cold. The dumpster rental had been booked under my name. I froze. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't called any company. I hadn't even ordered a pizza recently. The sanitation guy emailed me a scanned copy of the agreement. Sure enough, there was a signature on the form. And it was a disturbingly bad version of mine. Like someone had tried to imitate it by memory while drunk. Karen had forged my signature and rented a dumpster to my address, blocked my driveway, and staged her entire house-cleaning operation on my property. I walked back outside gripping my phone like it might snap. She was now directing 2 teenage boys with gloves and brooms to toss more of her junk into the container. I told her I knew what she'd done. That she'd signed my name. That the city was now involved. She just smirked and said if I wanted to discuss community bylaws, I could bring it up at the next meeting. Then she dropped a stack of old blinds into the bin with a dramatic clang and turned her back. At that moment, I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. Karen wasn't just entitled. She was dangerous. I missed the meeting. My team had to pitch the presentation without me. My partner called and said the investors were concerned about our leadership consistency. All because some entitled suburban dictator decided my property was her personal staging ground. I spent the next 3 hours calling every city official I could find, but no one could do anything that fast. Apparently dumpster disputes weren't exactly high priority. One guy even laughed when I told him the SUV was inside the container. By the afternoon, neighbors were starting to whisper. Some were peeking over hedges, snapping pictures. A few shook their heads like they'd seen this before. I found out later Karen had pulled similar stunts, leaving warning notes on lawn decorations, threatening fines over Halloween inflatables, trying to get someone's dog banned for being too expressive. But this was her biggest power trip yet. And this time, she picked the wrong target. I called my lawyer friend Tanya. She works in real estate and instantly knew what questions to ask. She told me not to touch anything. Let Karen keep digging her hole. Get everything on video. Take photos. Document everything. She also looked up the HOA records and found something interesting. Karen wasn't actually president. The last president had moved 2 months ago, and the next election wasn't scheduled until fall. So Karen had just appointed herself interim leader. With zero authority. Tanya said that with a forged signature and illegal use of my address, we were talking civil fraud. Maybe even criminal, depending on how far Karen pushed it. At sunset, I was still stuck. The dumpster hadn't moved. Her car was still inside it. And she had the nerve to come back outside in a new outfit, this time in full yoga gear with a crystal necklace, and ask if I'd mind keeping it there a few more days while she finished clearing her attic. I asked if she'd like me to start charging rent. She said she'd have to run it by the board. The imaginary board. I turned on my sprinklers just as she stepped back onto her lawn. That made her shriek and accuse me of water-based assault. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was either laugh or start screaming. Later that night, after the sun had dipped and Karen finally went inside, I walked over to the dumpster and took one last look. That's when I noticed something shiny inside her SUV. Hanging from the rearview mirror was a lanyard with some kind of keycard. I zoomed in with my phone and paused. It looked like an official HOA access badge. The kind only board members were given. The kind she wasn't supposed to have. My guess? She stole it from the last president before he moved. That gave me an idea. I didn't sleep that night. I was too busy drafting emails, saving files, checking municipal towing codes. I even went back through the HOA charter, which I had on PDF from a dispute 2 years ago, and found a clause that made me grin. It was buried halfway through a section on emergency access. But it was exactly what I needed. The next morning, while Karen was at her gym class or whatever dark arts she practiced, I made some calls. Quietly. Officially. Legally. Because if she wanted to dump garbage on my property, I'd make sure she never saw that dumpster again. And if her SUV happened to be inside when it went, so be it. This wasn't just going to be cleanup. This was going to be a full-blown extraction. And by the time I was done, Karen would be the one who felt like trash had been dumped on her front lawn. The next morning arrived with a calm so unnatural it felt like the universe was holding its breath. No Karen in sight, no new garbage being flung into the rusted dumpster, and no HOA violations taped to my door. I almost didn't trust it. I half expected a marching band to round the corner playing the HOA anthem while Karen rode the lead float tossing out forged citations. But for once it was quiet. Too quiet. I took that silence as a signal to act. I'd already lined up the documentation. Photos from every angle, time-stamped footage of the dumpster arriving, the SUV being partially lodged inside, and even a clip of Karen barking orders like she was commanding troops in a home decor warzone. But the piece de resistance was the forged rental agreement. The city official had emailed me the signed form the day before, and it was hilariously bad. My name had been spelled wrong, and the signature looked like someone drew it with their non-dominant hand during a bumpy bus ride. It was all I needed to confirm my next step. I called Tanya again. She had already pulled the HOA bylaws and walked me through the next phase. She reminded me not to engage with Karen, not to move the dumpster myself, and to let the process play out. Because if we did this right, we wouldn't just get the dumpster removed. We'd get Karen exposed. She'd used my name, my property, and tried to frame me for it all. But Tanya warned me that entitlement like Karen's didn't just vanish. She said expect retaliation, escalation, or something so petty it bordered on artistic. I laughed at that. But she wasn't joking. Karen wasn't going to take the hit quietly. Later that day, I took a walk through the neighborhood to let off steam. A few neighbors nodded or gave me sympathetic looks. One older couple stopped to chat and said they'd seen Karen doing similar things in the past, but were too afraid to speak up. Apparently, she once threatened to fine someone for having a wind chime that clashed with neighborhood sound design. Another guy told me she tried to ban basketball hoops for attracting riffraff. The more I heard, the more it made sense. Karen had been slowly tightening her grip on the HOA like some suburban warlord, feeding off fear and apathy. No one had pushed back. Until now. By evening, I received a response from the dumpster company. I had sent them a formal complaint, along with proof that I never authorized the rental. The response was short and apologetic. They said they'd been misled and the name on file was listed as mine, but after reviewing the signature, they agreed it looked suspicious. They offered to waive all late fees and said they would cooperate fully if the situation escalated to legal action. That gave me one more brick in my wall of proof. But Karen wasn't done. That night, just before midnight, she returned with a flashlight and clipboard and started inspecting other houses. I watched from my upstairs window as she crept along fences, took photos of someone's recycling bin, and jotted down notes like she was preparing for a sting operation. It would have been funny if it wasn't so creepy. I caught her shining her flashlight at my sprinkler timer before shaking her head and writing something down. Then she walked to her SUV, which was still awkwardly lodged halfway in the dumpster, and popped the trunk to shove in what looked like a small broken table lamp. Her nerve was unmatched. The next morning, I submitted the full complaint to the city's Code Enforcement Division. I also forwarded copies to the Police Fraud Unit, noting the forged signature and unauthorized use of my address. Tanya helped me write the report to make sure everything was airtight. I didn't know how fast the city would move, but I knew one thing: they wouldn't ignore this. Not with video, signed documents, and an entire dumpster parked illegally across a private driveway. While I waited, I prepped my next move. I met with Jay, my cousin who ran the local towing company. He'd seen my messages and agreed to meet discreetly at the edge of the neighborhood. Jay was the kind of guy who could tell you the towing laws in his sleep. He reviewed my photos and just shook his head slowly, letting out a whistle. Then he smiled. He told me that if a vehicle was blocking private property, and the owner had the right documentation, it could be towed. Dumpster or no dumpster. I clarified again. Even if the vehicle was parked partially inside a dumpster. He nodded. As long as it was blocking your access and the dumpster wasn't legally permitted, it counted as an obstruction. But we had to be precise. Jay said we'd need a signed removal request, visual proof, and a statement from code enforcement validating the obstruction. Luckily, I had all three lined up. The city inspector I'd spoken to the day before had agreed to stop by. He arrived around noon. Tall guy, sunglasses, clipboard. He walked around the dumpster slowly, took notes, shook his head, and muttered something about it being one of the worst placements he'd seen. I explained everything. The forged rental. The blocked driveway. The car inside. He took one more photo and said simply, "This shouldn't be here." I asked if he could put that in writing. He handed me a stamped notice that read code violation. Unpermitted waste receptacle. I had just unlocked the next level. That evening, I sat on my porch with a soda, watching Karen return from whatever yoga and judgment session she had attended. She parked on the street this time, clearly trying to avoid more attention. But she couldn't resist. As she passed the dumpster, she peeked in and noticed something missing. I had quietly removed the old table lamp she had added last night and placed it on her lawn with a note that read "Property returned. Please keep your trash to yourself." It wasn't illegal. Just poetic. She saw it and shrieked. I didn't even flinch. I just raised my soda can like I was toasting her spiral. Inside, my phone buzzed. It was Jay. All green lights. Tow was scheduled for 5 a.m. Early enough that Karen wouldn't be awake, but not so early that it would seem suspicious. The truck would clamp her SUV, lift it with the dumpster still attached, and haul the whole mess to the city impound. I reviewed every camera angle, every form, every document. Everything was perfect. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about what Tanya said. Entitled people escalate when they feel power slipping. I knew Karen wouldn't let it go easily. But I also knew I had the truth, the law, and the city on my side. The look on her face when that dumpster rolled away would be worth every lost hour, every missed meeting, every petty note she ever left in someone's mailbox. This wasn't just about a dumpster. It was about drawing the line. And tomorrow, that line would be enforced, with a flatbed, a steel clamp, and a city inspector's signature. Let the towing begin. The sky was still dark when I slipped out of my house at 4:50 a.m. The air was cold, thick with the kind of silence that made every movement feel louder than it should. I stood at the end of my driveway with my arms crossed, staring at the dumpster like it was a monument to insanity. Jay's truck rolled in at 5:02 on the dot, headlights off, engine humming low like a predator stalking its prey. He stepped out, nodded, and gave the paperwork one last glance. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. This was mechanical justice. Cold, clean, legal. We approached slowly, quietly. The clamp slid under the back tires of Karen's SUV while the hydraulic system cranked into action. The chains wrapped around the rusted steel of the dumpster like it had been waiting its whole life to be rescued from suburban oppression. The groan of metal scraping asphalt broke the morning silence, followed by the grinding sound of resistance giving way to raw horsepower. Inch by inch, the dumpster began to lift, Karen's luxury SUV still partially embedded in its side like a barnacle on a shipwreck. I couldn't believe it was working, but it was. Legally. Fully documented. Beautifully satisfying. Halfway through the lift, a porch light flicked on across the street. A curtain twitched. Someone was watching. Good. I hoped they were recording. The more eyes on this, the better. This wasn't just about getting my driveway back anymore. This was about sending a message. That people like Karen couldn't keep stomping all over others and expect no consequences. That there were still rules. That justice could roll in quietly before sunrise and carry away the mess, even when it wore designer sunglasses and drank $8 lattes. By 5:20, the dumpster and the SUV were securely fastened and ready to roll. Jay gave me a thumbs up and climbed into the cab. The tow truck pulled away slowly, rumbling past Karen's house like a tank on a mission. I watched it disappear down the street, disappearing into the early morning fog. The sense of relief was instant, but it was quickly replaced by something else, anticipation. Because Karen hadn't seen it yet. But when she did, the fallout would be nuclear. I went back inside, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat by the window like a man waiting for sunrise to set fire to the mountains. At exactly 6:11 a.m., Karen's door opened. She stepped out in her robe and slippers, hair wrapped in a towel like she'd just returned from a spa in the 90s. She walked to the edge of her yard, cup in hand, and froze. Her head tilted. Her brows twitched. Her jaw opened slightly like a car alarm just went off in her soul. The dumpster was gone. The SUV was gone. The world as she knew it had shifted. I watched her stare at the empty concrete like it personally betrayed her. Then she bolted back inside. I counted. 1, 2, 3. Exactly 4 minutes later, she stormed out fully dressed, phone in hand, purse swinging like a medieval flail. She stomped to my porch and started pounding on the door. I opened it slowly, sipping my coffee, still wearing my robe. She shouted that someone had stolen her vehicle, that there was theft, grand theft auto, dumpster abduction, property violation. Her words collided like bumper cars in a tornado. I calmly told her the city had towed the dumpster and her vehicle with it due to illegal obstruction and a forged rental. She accused me of lying, of orchestrating the whole thing. I handed her the stamped code violation notice from the city and the written towing authorization. She scanned it, flipped it over like a secret clause would be hiding on the back, then crumpled it in a rage. She said her cat was in the car. That Muffin was trapped inside and might be traumatized or worse. I stared at her, stunned. There was no cat in the car last night. I knew that. The animal control officer would later confirm it. But at that moment, she looked me in the eye and swore on her life Muffin was inside. That accusation changed everything. She dialed the non-emergency police line and began sobbing into the phone, claiming an animal had been kidnapped in a government-enabled tow operation. Within 15 minutes, a patrol car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out. One talked to Karen. The other came to me. I explained the whole thing. Documented everything, showed the code violation notice, the photos, the forged rental form. They nodded politely and asked to speak with the tow company. I gave them Jay's contact info. Within 30 minutes, everything was confirmed. There was no cat. Karen had fabricated the story to delay or reverse the tow. The officers warned her about filing a false emergency report and left. But Karen wasn't finished. Not even close. She spent the rest of the day going door to door, spinning wild stories about how I'd engineered a kidnapping of her personal vehicle and possessions, and used questionable city favors to take her down. Some neighbors nodded. Some rolled their eyes. A few recorded her rants. One even live-streamed it. She kept returning to the phrase, "He took my car with my cat inside." It became a punchline on the local subreddit within hours. Someone made a meme. The cat's face photoshopped into a tow truck. Caption: Muffin did nothing wrong. By late afternoon, I received an email from the city's impound office confirming Karen had paid the towing fee. Over $900 in charges, including storage, administrative fees, and a code fine. But she couldn't reclaim the vehicle just yet. They found damage inside the dumpster area and needed to document everything in case of further claims. Karen was furious. She threatened to sue the city. Then she threatened to sue me. Then she threatened to sue the tow company. Then she said she'd sue the HOA. That part was especially ironic, considering she claimed to run the HOA herself. The real twist came the next day when Tanya called. She'd gotten hold of some juicy details from a contact in municipal records. Apparently, Karen had used that forged signature trick before, once with a landscaping permit, and another time with a noise complaint waiver. She'd submitted multiple forms claiming to represent community consensus without any real vote. In other words, she'd been playing dictator with fake paperwork all over the neighborhood. And now that city officials had noticed a pattern, she wasn't just in violation. She was under investigation. The best part? Someone from the previous HOA board had come forward. He revealed that Karen had snatched his badge before he moved, claiming she'd return it later. That was the same badge I saw dangling in her SUV, the one she used to bluff her authority. Tanya suggested we forward all this to the official HOA Oversight Committee. I did that the same evening, attaching photos, documentation, and a written summary. It was time for Karen's imaginary crown to fall. That night, as I took out the trash, I saw Karen standing at the edge of her driveway staring into the distance like a queen surveying a battlefield she had just lost. Her SUV was back, scratched from dumpster debris, missing a mirror, and definitely no longer shining. Her reputation was worse. Even the neighbors who once tiptoed around her were now ignoring her. A few waved at me with half-smiles that said everything without saying a word. But I knew this wasn't over yet. Not with someone like Karen. This was just the third chapter in a book she never expected to be written about her. And I wasn't just the neighbor anymore. I was the guy who had dared to draw the line and tow away her throne. The calm that followed was deceptive. For a few days, it felt like things were settling down. Karen had retreated indoors, and the neighborhood buzz had shifted to other things. Some people talked about upcoming garage sales, others about who was repainting their fences. The infamous dumpster incident had started fading from the front of everyone's minds, but I knew better. Karen was not the type to let go, not the type to retreat in shame and learn a lesson. She was the kind who brewed resentment like strong tea, letting it steep until it was bitter enough to serve. And sure enough, on a quiet Wednesday morning, it all started again with a knock at my door. This time, it wasn't Karen standing outside. It was a woman in a blazer holding a manila folder and a clipboard. She introduced herself as a mediator hired by the HOA to investigate escalating complaints between residents. Apparently, Karen had filed an official grievance. I raised an eyebrow and invited her in, offering coffee out of pure courtesy. She politely declined but opened the folder and began reading the list. Karen had accused me of harassment, trespassing, destruction of private property, animal endangerment, and a dozen other absurd things. I almost laughed when I saw psychological sabotage scribbled in quote. The mediator said the HOA was obligated to document all complaints and offer a resolution path before things escalated to civil action. I calmly handed her my folder in return: photos, documents, emails, and statements from the city, the towing company, and even the HOA Oversight Committee. Her eyebrows lifted with each page. She stayed for over an hour, carefully reviewing everything. By the end, her tone shifted. She thanked me, said she'd need to speak with Karen separately, and promised to follow up within the week. As she walked back to her car, I watched Karen's curtains twitch from across the street. She was watching, always watching, and clearly not done yet. But something about her face in that window told me the desperation was starting to show. Later that afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was printed on HOA letterhead but poorly formatted. It demanded that I appear before an emergency hearing for acts of aggression against a community leader. I knew immediately Karen had drafted it herself. I checked with the official HOA rep, and sure enough, no such meeting was authorized. That same rep told me something even more interesting. Karen's authority was being questioned by the district office due to multiple complaints of overreach, falsified documents, and unapproved policy enforcement. They were conducting a full review. It was clear now. The power Karen had hoarded for so long was slipping through her fingers, and she was clawing for control any way she could. The next day, a small group of neighbors stopped by. They had heard everything and wanted to talk. One woman said Karen had threatened her with a lawn citation for leaving Halloween decorations up 2 days past October. A man said Karen once told his wife to stop hosting book club meetings because non-residents shouldn't be wandering the neighborhood. Everyone had a story. Everyone had stayed silent. But now they were ready. They wanted Karen out. Not just reprimanded. Removed. Someone floated the idea of a petition, and by the following morning, it had already gathered over 24 signatures. Word spread quickly. More residents came forward. One had emails Karen sent under the guise of the board, when in reality no vote had ever occurred. Another had texts where Karen threatened to revoke community access to someone's backyard trampoline. It was all piling up, and Tanya helped me collect every piece into a single, organized packet that we sent directly to the HOA Compliance Council. The weight of it was undeniable. But just when it looked like we were approaching resolution, Karen made one last move that stunned us all. She sent a cease and desist letter to the entire neighborhood. Every household claimed she was being defamed, slandered, harassed. She warned of legal consequences if people continued to speak her name or spread malicious rumors. The letter was riddled with typos and printed on paper with a crooked margin, but the intent was clear. She wanted to silence the entire block. That was her final tactic: intimidation through fake legality. Most neighbors laughed. A few were genuinely scared. I reassured them with copies of the legal documents Tanya had helped draft. The cease and desist had no legal weight. Karen had no lawyer, no standing, no actual title. But her desperation reached one final boiling point at the next HOA town hall. She showed up uninvited, stood in front of the microphone during public comments, and began ranting about betrayal, injustice, and how she had sacrificed for the community. She accused me of orchestrating a neighborhood coup, waved around what she claimed were emails showing harassment, and shouted that she would see all of us in court. The room was silent at first, stunned by the outburst. But then one of the older board members, a quiet retired schoolteacher named Mr. Franklin, stood up and calmly asked her to step down. When she refused, he read aloud the official letter from the HOA Oversight Board. Effective immediately, Karen was suspended from any HOA-related roles pending a full investigation. She tried to grab the microphone again, but security stepped in. The town hall ended in chaos, but everyone knew what had happened. The reign of HOA Karen had officially cracked. Back at home, I received one final surprise that night. A message from the city. They were forwarding Karen's forged rental forms to their legal department. She was now under investigation for municipal fraud. It was no longer a neighborhood issue. It was criminal. And as I sat on my porch, sipping coffee in the same spot where I first saw that cursed dumpster, I finally exhaled. It had taken every ounce of patience, documentation, and calm restraint to reach this point. But it was worth it. Karen wasn't just being removed. She was being held accountable. And there wasn't a dumpster big enough to contain the consequences she was about to face. The morning after the town hall, there was a strange quiet across the neighborhood, like the air itself had been purged of something heavy and toxic. People walked their dogs with more relaxed step. Kids played in the yards again. Lawn chairs that had disappeared for months were suddenly back out on porches. It was subtle, but you could feel it. The neighborhood was breathing again. The storm had passed, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly, and judging from the final look on her face as she was escorted out of that meeting, she wasn't done scheming. Not by a long shot. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a package at my doorstep. It was wrapped in a cheap manila envelope with no return address, but the handwriting on it gave it away instantly. Karen's blocky, overconfident penmanship was all over the label. I opened it with caution. Inside were a printed stack of papers, half highlighted, some barely legible, others outright laughable. It was a homemade legal threat, a mock lawsuit accusing me of character assassination, emotional trauma, and intentional interference with her HOA responsibilities. She included screenshots of Facebook posts from neighbors mocking her, a blurry photo of her car being towed, and even a grainy still image of herself yelling at the HOA meeting, claiming it had been edited to make her look angry. It was delusion printed in 12-point font. I sent everything to Tanya, who responded with a single sentence, "She's not suing anyone." That gave me some peace, but the very fact that she had gone to such lengths proved she hadn't accepted her fall. She was still trying to play the victim, to rewrite reality like some bad soap opera writer who couldn't let their favorite villain die. But the rest of the neighborhood wasn't buying it anymore. In fact, things were moving fast now. The official HOA Oversight Committee was wrapping up their investigation, and according to a neighbor who worked in the city clerk's office, Karen's name had been flagged in multiple departments for suspicious activity, including zoning fraud and forged documents. One afternoon, I came home to find a black SUV parked in front of Karen's house. 2 plainclothes investigators were on her porch, calmly talking while she stood there with her arms crossed, trying to look composed. She kept gesturing toward my house, her voice rising even though I couldn't hear the words. The investigators remained professional, took notes, and eventually walked away without incident. That was the first real sign that the walls were closing in. And they were closing in fast. The final blow didn't come with fireworks. It came in the form of a letter sent to every house in the subdivision. It was from the HOA Oversight Committee, stamped and signed by the regional director. In it, they formally announced that Karen had been permanently barred from holding any HOA office due to repeated violations of protocol, misuse of authority, falsification of legal documents, and harassment of community members. The letter didn't hold back. It stated that Karen had endangered the legal standing of the entire HOA and that the committee would now be overseeing the appointment of new leadership. The reaction was instant. Neighbors gathered in driveways and yards reading the letter aloud like it was a proclamation of freedom. For the first time since all this had started, there was laughter, genuine, unfiltered joy at knowing the nightmare was over. A few days later, the neighborhood hosted an informal block party, something that hadn't happened in years. People brought lawn games, food, folding chairs, and music. I walked over with a cooler and was greeted like I was some kind of returning hero. One neighbor shook my hand and said I had done what everyone else had been too afraid to. Another handed me a homemade mug that read Neighborhood Cleanup Crew with a picture of a tiny dumpster towing a sports car. It was ridiculous and perfect. Karen, of course, didn't attend. Her blinds stayed shut, her house dark, her car unmoved in the driveway. She had been exiled by her own behavior, left to stew in the mess she created. But the part that no one knew, not until the very end, was the final twist waiting just around the corner. One evening, I received a phone call from the city attorney's office. They informed me that Karen had been officially charged with misdemeanor fraud for the forged dumpster rental form and the unauthorized use of municipal resources. It wasn't going to land her in jail, but it would go on record. She would be fined, and if she pulled any similar stunt again, it would be escalated to felony charges. When I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time, thinking about how it had started with one dumpster and ended with criminal charges. It felt surreal, like some movie plot written for dramatic effect, but this was real. Every loud clang, every shouted insult, every fake citation, real. And as if fate wanted to tie it all up with poetic precision, I received a final letter a week later from the new HOA board. It was a thank you letter. Short, professional, but sincere. They acknowledged the role I played in exposing misconduct and encouraged other residents to step forward in the future if similar issues ever arose. Attached was a request. They wanted me to join the new advisory committee, help reshape the rules, ensure fairness. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be pulled back into the politics, the drama. But then I realized something. If people like me didn't step up, someone like Karen always would. So I said yes. Not because I wanted the power, but because someone needed to hold the line. Someone needed to make sure no more dumpsters got dropped in the wrong driveways. A few months later, things had changed. The HOA ran smoothly. Rules were voted on, not dictated. Disputes were handled with transparency. And Karen? She sold her house quietly and disappeared from the community without a word. Some said she moved to Florida. Others joked she probably joined another HOA and started the whole cycle again. But we didn't care. She was gone. And we had reclaimed our peace. Sometimes I walk past that spot where the dumpster once stood. The asphalt's still scratched from the metal claws, a faint mark of what used to be. But it doesn't bother me. It's a reminder of what happens when you stand your ground, when you document, when you don't let someone like Karen rewrite the rules. In the end, justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical, and carried out by the book. And that, somehow, made it even more satisfying. The best part? The city sent me a notice a month later stating they were refunding me the initial citation Karen had caused when she forged the rental in my name. Not only did I get my driveway back, I got every dime back too. All of it. Every petty move she made backfired. Every lie collapsed. And somewhere out there, I hope she's thinking twice the next time she tries to hijack someone's driveway with a dumpster. Because now, every time I take out my trash, I smile. Not because the war is over, but because I know that if it ever happens again, I'll be ready. With proof. With patience. And with a tow truck on speed dial.